Inside a lab in Hefei, China just held a cloud of gas at over 100 million degrees Celsius, 7 times hotter than the core of our own sun, steady for longer than any machine on Earth ever has, and the physicists watching it are stunned. Before we go any deeper, we break down shifts like this the moment they happen, while everyone else is still writing headlines, so hit subscribe and turn on notifications, and the next China breakthrough finds you first before the rest of the world catches up. The machine has a name. It is called EAST, a donut-shaped reactor sitting inside the Institute of Plasma Physics in Hefei, and its engineers gave it a nickname that sounds like a bad science fiction poster: the artificial sun. And here is the thing about that nickname. It is not marketing. Inside that ring, they built something that burns the same fuel as the star at the center of our solar system, and they held it hotter than that star's own heart. Hold that number in your head, 100 million degrees, because it is the whole story. For 70 years, the West told itself a very comfortable version of the future. The first working fusion reactor, the machine that finally cracks the code the sun uses to shine, that was going to light up in a lab in California, or somewhere in Europe, or in Japan. Everybody in the field just sort of assumed it. And then, in a city most people outside China have never heard of, a machine crossed the line that the smartest, best-funded labs on the planet had been chasing since the 1950s, and almost no one outside those labs saw it coming. So here is what I want to do. By the end of this, you are going to understand 3 things. What nuclear fusion actually is, in plain language, no physics degree required. Why the heat problem has stumped the entire field for 7 decades. And how you gauge a temperature that would vaporize any wall on Earth using a bottle made of nothing but invisible force. Stick with me, because once you see the trick, you cannot unsee it. Let's start with the word itself. Fusion. Strip away the jargon, and it is almost stupidly simple. You take atoms, the tiniest building blocks of everything, and you slam them together so hard that they fuse into one, and that collision spits out a staggering amount of energy. That is not a theory. That is the exact reaction happening in the core of the sun right now, and in every star you have ever looked up at. We are talking about lighting a tiny star on the ground and stealing its power. Simple to say, almost impossible to do. And the reason is the heat. To force those atoms to fuse, you have to heat the fuel into a state called plasma. Think of a gas so furiously hot it stops behaving like a gas at all, and you have to push it past 100 million degrees. Now here is the wall. Nothing solid can touch a gas that hot. Nothing. Steel, tungsten, diamond. Any wall you build would not melt. It would flash into vapor the instant that plasma brushed against it. And it gets worse, because the plasma itself does not want to cooperate. It writhes. It bulges. It constantly tries to wriggle loose and cool itself down. You are trying to hold on to something that is both unimaginably hot and desperate to escape. That is the wall every team on Earth kept smashing into. For half a century, brilliant people, decades ahead of their time, backed by the deepest pockets in science, got the heat and then lost it in a fraction of a second. A blink. A flicker. Then gone. 70 years of the best minds alive, and the finish line just kept sitting there, untouched. Now I owe you the honest part, because this channel does not do hype. A lot of the data on East flows through Chinese state channels, and I want you to be a little skeptical here, because you should be. But stay with me, because the machine is real. The Institute of Plasma Physics exists. East exists. It sits in Hefei. It is powered on, and it is running. You can be as cautious as you like about the exact numbers, and that part still cannot be walked back. And that raises the real question, doesn't it? Why did almost no one outside those labs see this coming? Here is the uncomfortable answer. It is not that the signals weren't there. It is that most people don't know how to read them until the headline finally lands, by which point the shift already happened. That is exactly the gap a guide called the China Signal is built to close. It decodes what China is actually building: energy, chips, manufacturing, infrastructure, one sector at a time, so you learn to spot early signals like this East milestone before the rest of the world catches on. Instead of scrambling to understand a breakthrough after it hits the news, you read China's rise with confidence, several steps ahead of the crowd. You can scan the code on screen or grab the link in the description. So back to the machine that should not be possible. You have a plasma at 100 million degrees, 7 times hotter than the center of the sun, and it will destroy anything it touches. Which leaves one screaming question. So how do you hold something 7 times hotter than the sun without it burning through everything it touches? That is where this gets almost unbelievable. Because China's answer was not to build a stronger wall. It was to build no wall at all. They cage that impossible heat inside a container that has no physical surface whatsoever. A bottle woven out of nothing but powerful, invisible magnetic fields. And to understand how a thing made of pure force can hold a superheated plasma suspended in mid-air, never once letting it touch a single wall, you have to picture something almost absurd. Juggling a single drop of molten lava using only magnets, never once letting it land. Juggling a single drop of molten lava using only magnets, never once letting it land. That is exactly what East does, except the drop is a plasma 7 times hotter than the sun's core, and there is no bowl beneath it at all. This is the tokamak. Instead of a physical container, the machine weaves a bottle out of nothing but powerful magnetic fields, holding the superheated plasma suspended in the middle of the chamber, so it never kisses a wall. So picture the shape first. Take a donut, a hollow ring. Now wrap that ring in enormous electromagnets, coils of superconducting wire chilled to nearly absolute zero, humming with current strong enough to lift a battleship. Those magnets reach into the empty space inside the donut and grab the plasma directly, bending it into a floating loop that races around and around the ring, held dead center, touching nothing solid. The hottest thing on this planet, and it hangs there in the middle of the chamber, cradled by force alone. Let that sit for a moment. The walls of this machine are not made of metal. They are made of pure force. And that is the whole trick. The magnetic fields are the only walls this thing has. There is no ceramic lining tough enough, no metal alloy on Earth that could survive a single second of contact with 100 million degrees. Any solid surface would flash into vapor instantly. So the plasma is never allowed to touch a surface at all. It is juggled, held in midair by invisible hands that squeeze from every direction at once, exactly like keeping that drop of lava aloft with nothing but magnets. And the instant those hands waver, even slightly, the whole thing tries to wriggle loose and die. Because here is the part that stopped everyone for half a century. A plasma this hot does not want to be held. It is not a calm, obedient gas. It squirms. It bulges and kinks and shoves against the magnetic cage like water in a balloon you are trying to crush with your bare hands. Push in on one side, it bursts out the other. Every tiny instability grows in a heartbeat. The loop touches the edge of the field, cools, and the reaction collapses. For 50 years, the best teams on the planet, brilliant, funded, decades deep, could only balance that squirming plasma for fractions of a second before it slipped and went cold. That was the wall. Not building the heat, holding it. Now what are you actually burning inside that magnetic bottle? The fuel is deuterium and tritium, two heavy, chunkier cousins of ordinary hydrogen. Regular hydrogen is the lightest, simplest atom there is. Deuterium is that same atom carrying one extra particle, and tritium carries two. Slam those two heavy forms of hydrogen together hard enough, and they fuse into helium and fling out a burst of energy. That is the exact same reaction that lights the sun. And this is where it stops sounding like a lab curiosity and starts sounding like something that rewrites everything because of where that fuel comes from. Deuterium can be pulled straight out of ordinary seawater. Not refined uranium dug from a handful of mines. Not oil pumped from beneath a few contested deserts. Seawater. The stuff that covers 70% of the planet. Think about what that actually means. The fuel is in the water you swam in last summer. Every ocean, every sea, every wave that rolls onto every beach on Earth. A fuel tank. There is enough deuterium in the top layer of the world's oceans to run human civilization for longer than we can meaningfully imagine. Tritium is trickier and rarer, and a real plant would need to breed its own, so I am not going to pretend the fuel side is fully solved. But the core ingredient, the deuterium, is effectively everywhere, and it is effectively free. That is why physicists have called fusion the Holy Grail for 70 years, and they do not throw that phrase around lightly. This is not just clean power. Solar is clean. Wind is clean. Fusion is clean and near limitless and impossible to cut off. Think about what that last part does to the map. Oil can be embargoed. Gas pipelines can be shut off at a border. A country can be squeezed by whoever controls the supply. But nobody can blockade the sea. You cannot sanction the ocean. A nation running on deuterium is a nation that can never be starved of fuel. And that single fact is why this race has always been about far more than electricity. Now let me be straight with you. The way I promised. The exact numbers, precisely how hot, precisely how long East held that record, come largely through Chinese state channels. And whenever the headline and the source share a flag, a measured dose of skepticism is just being honest. Maybe the duration gets rounded up. Maybe the framing gets polished for the cameras. Fine. Hold the specific figures loosely. But the tokamak in Hefei is real. Those superconducting magnets are real, photographed, bolted to the floor of the Institute of Plasma Physics. The machine draws real power and produces real plasma, and international researchers have worked inside that very facility. So strip away every number you might doubt, and this still stands. The artificial sun exists, and it is running. And that is exactly where this stops being a science story and turns into something with teeth. Because a lab record is one thing. Scaling that record up into a working plant that pours power onto a real grid is another thing entirely. That leap is enormous, and we will get to why it is still unfinished. But hold on to the size of the prize for a second, because if this approach makes that leap, it does not simply add one more option to the menu of power sources. It detonates the current order. Everything the modern world is built on top of. So if the fuel is basically free and the heat can finally be held, ask yourself one thing. Who exactly loses when this works? Because near limitless, near zero carbon power with fuel pulled straight from the sea is not just an energy story. It is a weapon aimed at the current order. And the moment the first country runs a real fusion plant, the oil markets that quietly run the modern world, the coal and gas supply chains, the entire Western lead in high-energy technology, all of it sits directly in the blast radius. The only question left is who fired first, and whether the West even realizes the race is already being lost. And that last question, whether the West even realizes the race is already being lost, is the one that should sit heavy with you. Because the honest answer is that most of the people who set energy policy have no real idea how close the finish line already is. So look at what a working fusion plant actually would be. Not another power station in a long line of power stations. Something closer to a new law of physics for the entire global economy. Whoever fires up the first commercial fusion plant does not just win an energy prize. They hand themselves a decisive edge in the whole global balance of power, the kind of edge oil handed the 20th century, except cleaner, cheaper, and almost impossible to embargo. This is the part almost no one is talking about, and it is the part that actually reaches your wallet. Picture what happens the day fusion goes commercial. Power that is effectively limitless. Power with almost no carbon coming out of it. Fuel you scoop from ordinary seawater instead of drilling for it or mining it. Let that sit for a moment, because the consequences are brutal for the world we live in right now. The oil markets that quietly run everything, the price of your fuel, your groceries, the shipping cost baked into every product in your house, those markets would crater, not dip, crater. The petrostates whose entire national budgets ride on the barrel would watch their leverage evaporate. The coal and gas supply chains that took a full century to build would have to reshape almost overnight, because why on earth would you burn anything when you can pull clean power straight out of a magnetic bottle? And here is the piece that redraws the map. Energy stops being a thing anyone can cut you off from. No pipeline left to shut. No tanker to blockade. No cartel to set a price. The single biggest lever between nations for the last 100 years simply loses most of its grip. So understand exactly who is in this race, because it is not some quiet science project tucked away in a corner. This is China against the United States, the EU, and Japan. And every one of them has been chasing this same finish line for decades, pouring billions into their own reactors, each one quietly assuming they would be the team to cross it first. That assumption is the whole story here. Because the machine that just edged ahead, the one that held the impossible longer than any lab on Earth, is not in California, not in Europe, not in Japan. It is sitting in Hefei, inside a facility most people outside China have never even heard of. Now, I'm not going to oversell this to you. It is a record, not a finished power plant. But hold on to what is undeniable. Let me be completely fair here, because this is the exact spot where a lot of channels start lying to you. East is a research reactor. It set a record. It is not yet a plant lighting up a single city, and the hardest wall of all is still standing right in front of it. Getting from a stunning lab result to continuous, reliable commercial power. Power that runs day and night for years without flinching, is a different mountain entirely. And yes, a lot of this data still flows through Chinese state channels, so a measured dose of skepticism is not just allowed here, it is the right instinct. But strip all of that away, and something survives that no amount of skepticism can touch. The machine exists. It is running. It held a superheated plasma steady, and the record cannot be walked back. And that is what pulls us all the way back to where we started. Remember the image. A plasma at over 100 million degrees Celsius, 7 times hotter than the core of our own sun. Held suspended in a cage made of nothing but magnetic fields, never once kissing a wall, inside a donut-shaped machine in Hefei. Day after day, run after run, breaking the world record for how long a human being has ever held the impossible in place. That is the artificial sun. That is the fusion sun that hit 100 million degrees. And now you know exactly why the physicists are stunned. Not because the numbers are loud, because they are real, and because they lasted. But here is the reframe that ties this entire thing together, and it is far bigger than one reactor in one Chinese province. This is how technology curves actually work. They look flat for a very, very long time. Fusion looked flat for 70 years. 70 years of the brightest minds on the planet holding that heat for fractions of a second, and then watching it collapse, over and over, decade after decade after decade, flat, 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 and then, all at once, the curve is not flat at all. The line that crawled along the floor for an entire lifetime turns, and it climbs. So sit with the real reason those physicists in Hefei are stunned. It is not that a miracle happened. Nobody rewrote the laws of nature in a lab on the edge of a Chinese city. What happened is quieter than that, and honestly, far more important than any miracle. The slow part of the curve just ended. The 70 flat years are over. The part that goes vertical has begun, and the country standing at the bottom of that climb, holding the record in its hands, is the one almost nobody was watching. So here is my question for you. Which industry do you think fusion upends first? Oil, coal, or the entire grid? Drop it in the comments. I read them.